So this is an overview of the job of replacing a water pump. This is a 2005 Chevy Suburban 5.3, and I personally don't like to go through a whole video to find out what I need to do. I just want kind of the answer and get on with the job. So the first thing you need to do is remove this. You do that by unscrewing or unloosening a screw here, screw there. With that out of the way, you need to put a pan or something to catch the coolant fluid. Unless you're having problems with overheating or heater issues, not getting hot, and if your coolant looks fine, it is fine, and there's no need to flush the system if it's all right. So what you're going to do is loosen this. You're going to loosen this hose here. This hose here will drain the radiator of coolant, so you definitely want to have something under the truck to catch it. Once you loosen it, you can lift it up if you want to save coolant, and put it behind this or hold it up so it doesn't drain all the fluid out. You need to unloosen the two heater hoses. One goes to the heater, one comes back. Take those clamps off, pull those hoses out. Those are also going to drain the coolant from the heater core. So you, again, want to have something under the vehicle to catch it. And that's it. You've got these two hoses, this radiator hose, this hose. Pull those things off. Then turn this guys using like a breaker bar or a big socket arm. Pull your serpentine belt off. That will allow you to get to the water pump. There are 6 bolts, 6 screws on the water pump. There's 3 on this side, 3 kind of tucked over here. They're easy to get to though once you get the serpentine belt off. This car doesn't have a fan. It's got, the electrical fans here, and I just discovered it doesn't have a fan. I don't know if it's supposed to or not, but we've never had any heating issues. So that's the basic job. These 4 hoses, take the serpentine belt off, pull the 6 screws out of the water pump, and you'll be able to pull the water pump off. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is unloosen the 2 clamps there and there and pull this thing off. I've already loosened them. It comes out pretty easily. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the serpentine belt. To remove the serpentine belt, you need a 15mm socket, and you turn this clockwise and it'll allow you to pull that belt off. So turn it clockwise, and that'll allow you to pull the belt off. Comes off super easy. At this point, you can also check to see if you need a new one. Look for any cracking like that. I'm going to replace this. Whenever I see cracking, I just replace it automatically. Pretty cheap, about 20 bucks. After you remove the belt, you need to remove 3 15mm screws, and then there's one hidden back here. Remove that. There's one there I already removed. Remove this one, and the tensioner will come off. You can also spin this tensioner, see how the bearings are. If it's stiff or loose, or does it spin freely, you'll want to replace that if it's not spinning smoothly, or if it's loose this way. That's okay. This one seems fine. At this point I can confirm that the leak is coming out of the water pump weep hole. You can see it's wet right here. It's dripping down here and dripping off the bottom. So this pump does need to come out. At this point you can undo the clamp for the hose here and these 2 clamps like I have, and pull the hoses off. So the way I flush out the heater core is to put water from a hose into this one. I'm using a little nozzle on my hose here, like that. Put that in there, turn on the water, hold it there, and water will come out here. The old coolant, as well as any grit and grime or whatever. To remove the 10mm screws that hold the water pump on, I'm going to use obviously a 10mm socket with an extension. With the last screw removed, you can simply pry this apart. Be sure there's a container underneath the car catching the liquid. And out comes your water pump. Again, looking at the bottom, you can see where the weep hole, which you can't see because it's behind this thing, but it's been leaking coolant, and so that again confirms that this thing needed to be replaced. With the water pump out, you're going to want to come in here and completely clean these surfaces. Nothing is particularly hard about this job, but scraping these surfaces free of all the gasket material and sealant is probably the hardest and worst part of the whole thing. I'm using a chisel and a razor blade. Some of this gasket material is on there pretty hard. The sealant got extremely hard, but also don't let any of it get down in these water chambers either. And while you're at it, you might want to put a new air conditioning belt on. This one's cracked. I'm gonna have to put a new one on there just to be safe. So just keep doing this till you get it all removed. Clean it up with a razor blade, maybe some acetone or paint thinner on a rag. Here's a thermostat housing I'm going to pull off. It comes with 2 new screws. I'm going to make sure this surface is completely flat and then use it on the new pump. You can remove the two 15mm screws once it's off. Replace the thermostat. And clean up this surface. I like to use a razor blade. So this surface looks pretty good, but there's a little corrosion, little dirt on these surfaces. So I'm going to use a new razor blade. And with a slight angle, because you don't want to create any gouges. I'm going to go over these surfaces. And you can see it's hard. Well, let's see. You can kind of see getting gunk off of it. If I didn't have a new razor blade, I would just clean it with solvent. So with the new thermostat, it gets pressed into place. So using this paper gasket, I'm going to apply a thin layer of RTV sealant on both sides of this and then lay it down. Position this, clean up around the edges here. And then I'm going to apply a thin layer to this side. I have to say I've done this without using this sealant and with using it, and the book calls for using it, although it has worked well without having it. So the danger is you just have to replace the gasket with a new one and apply some sealant if it leaks. This stuff is high temp stuff. It's a little bit of overkill, but it'll work. Then tighten each of these screws to 132 inch-pounds if you've got the V8. It's 168 inch-pounds if you have the V6 engine. But for mine, it's the V8, it's 132 inch-pounds. Not foot-pounds, inch-pounds. I made that mistake once. £132 these get tightened to. So there's 120. $130. 132. Apply RTV sealant on these two surfaces and apply it also to this side of the gasket. It's got the rubber gaskets there. Apply it around those rubber glass gaskets. And then apply it on this side of that gasket. So with the sealant on, it's time to put this back on the truck. I first put the screws in to make sure they line up with the holes on the gaskets. And then I'll place this on and tighten the bolts down. Putting those screws in also helps keep the gasket in place while you place this onto the engine block. I will get the top two screws, the one over there, started into the threads, and that will align the water pump for the other 4 screws. So with these 6 screws in place, tighten them to 132 inch-pounds. Once you've tightened the screws to 132 inch-pounds, you can then put the tensioner back on. So with the tensioner on, you can now reattach the hoses. Those 4 hoses and put the clamps on. With the hoses fastened, it's time to put the serpentine belt back on. This is the configuration my car has. I can't do this and hold the camera, but I'm going to attach the breaker bar here and bend this clockwise, and that will bring this closer and put that. I'll put the serpentine belt around that last pulley. And then double check to make sure these are on all of the pulleys properly. So now at this point you can put the air duct back on. Tighten these with a flathead screwdriver, that screw, and that screw, and then you can fill up the coolant reservoir with about 16.7 quarts of antifreeze, and that is it. Here it is back together and running, no leaks. It's now been a few days and it's working great.